Imagine waking up one day to find out that the President of the United States just tried to buy your country. Not with a casual offer, but with a serious proposal backed by billions of dollars. That's exactly what happened to the people of Greenland when Donald Trump shocked the world by attempting to purchase this massive island. But here's what makes this story truly fascinating. America isn't alone in this Arctic obsession. Russia is militarizing the region at an unprecedented pace, and China is quietly positioning itself as Greenland's economic lifeline. Three superpowers, one frozen island, and a geopolitical chess game that could reshape the entire world order. What makes this ice-covered territory so valuable that nations are willing to risk international incidents to control it? The answer will change on everything you thought you knew about global power. Greenland is not just another cold, remote island. It's the world's largest island that isn't a continent, spanning over 2 million square kilometers. To put that in perspective, it's roughly 3 times the size of Texas, yet only about 56,000 people call it home. Most of Greenland is covered by an ice sheet that contains about 10% of the world's fresh water. For centuries, this seemed like a frozen wasteland with little strategic value. But climate change, technological advancement, and shifting global power dynamics have transformed Greenland into possibly the most strategically important piece of real estate on planet Earth. The ice that once made it inaccessible is now melting, revealing resources and opportunities that were previously locked away. And this is where our story really begins. Let's start with the treasure beneath the ice. Greenland sits on one of the richest deposits of rare earth elements anywhere on the world. We're talking about minerals like neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, and terbium. These aren't just fancy scientific names. These are the critical materials that power virtually every piece of modern technology you use. Your smartphone, your laptop, electric vehicle batteries, wind turbines, military weapon systems, fighter jets, precision missiles, satellites. All of these depend entirely on rare earth elements. Here's the problem that keeps Western leaders awake at night. China currently controls about 70% of global rare earth mining and a staggering 90% of rare earth processing. This gives Beijing enormous leverage over the entire global economy and military capabilities of other nations. If China decided to cut off rare earth exports tomorrow, it could cripple industries across America and Europe within months. Greenland represents the best chance for the West to break this monopoly. Geological surveys have identified massive deposits, particularly around areas like Kvanefjeld in southern Greenland, which could contain enough rare earths to supply global demand for decades. But the resources don't stop there. Greenland is believed to hold vast reserves of oil and gas, possibly containing up to 50 billion barrels of oil and massive natural gas deposits. There's gold, diamonds, rubies, zinc, lead, and iron ore. The United States Geological Survey conducted extensive research and concluded that Greenland's offshore areas might contain some of the last untapped oil reserves on the planet. We're talking about resources worth potentially trillions of dollars. For Russia, which has built its entire economy on energy exports, Greenland represents both an opportunity and a threat. For America, it's a chance to secure energy independence and strategic minerals. For China, it's the key to sustaining its technological dominance and breaking free from resource constraints. Now let's talk about why geography makes Greenland absolutely critical to American national security. During the Cold War, Greenland was considered America's first line of defense against Soviet nuclear bombers and missiles. The Thule Air Base in northern Greenland became one of the most important military installations in the American defense network. It housed early warning radar systems designed to detect incoming Soviet missiles, giving America precious minutes to respond to a nuclear attack. That strategic importance never disappeared. It actually increased. Today, Thule Air Base is home to critical components of America's ballistic missile defense system. It tracks satellites, monitors space for potential threats, and serves as a key node in protecting North America from intercontinental ballistic missiles. But here's what's changed. The melting Arctic ice is opening up entirely new sea routes and making the Arctic Ocean navigable for much of the year. This is creating what military strategists call the Geopolitics gap issue. That stands for Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom. This gap represents the strategic choke point between the North Atlantic and the Arctic Ocean. Any Russian submarines or naval vessels trying to reach the Atlantic Ocean must pass through this gap. Control of Greenland means control of this vital strategic passage. Russian military activity in the Arctic has exploded in recent years. Moscow has reopened dozens of Soviet-era military bases along its Arctic coast, established new airfields, deployed advanced missile systems, and conducted massive military exercises involving tens of thousands of troops. Russia has built nuclear-powered icebreakers, more than 40 of them, giving it unmatched capability to operate in Arctic waters year-round. America has only 2 aging icebreakers in comparison. Russia is also developing hypersonic missiles specifically designed for Arctic deployment, weapons that could strike American targets with virtually no warning time. From Greenland, America can monitor all of this activity, intercept communications, track submarine movements, and maintain a credible deterrent presence. Losing influence in Greenland would create a massive gap in American defense capabilities and potentially allow Russia to project power directly toward North America. This is why American military planners view Greenland not as a luxury, but as an absolute necessity for national defense. China's approach to Greenland is completely different, but equally strategic. Beijing isn't trying to establish military bases or make dramatic purchase offers. Instead, China is doing what it does best, using economic power to gain influence quietly and systematically. Chinese companies have been investing heavily in Greenland's mining sector, offering to fund infrastructure projects that the small Greenlandic economy could never afford on its own. We're talking about proposals to build airports, harbors, mining facilities, and processing plants, all financed by Chinese capital. In 2018, Chinese state-owned companies bid to construct 3 major airports in Greenland, a project worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The Danish government and the United States both freaked out. Why? Because those airports could theoretically be used for military purposes in the future, giving China a physical foothold in the Arctic. After intense diplomatic pressure, Greenland ultimately rejected the Chinese bids. But the incident revealed just how aggressively China is pursuing Arctic access. China has declared itself a near-Arctic state, which is geographically absurd since China is nowhere near the Arctic Circle, but it signals Beijing's intentions perfectly clearly. China needs Arctic resources desperately. As the world's largest manufacturer and the second largest economy, China consumes resources at an unprecedented rate. The rare earth elements in Greenland could secure China's technological future. The opening Arctic shipping routes could cut thousands of miles off the journey between Asia and Europe, saving Chinese companies billions in transportation costs. The Northern Sea Route along Russia's coast could reduce shipping time between Shanghai and European ports by up to 40%. China has already invested over $90 billion in Arctic-related projects, including stakes in Russian liquefied natural gas facilities, mining operations, and shipping infrastructure. Greenland represents the missing piece in China's Arctic strategy. If Beijing can secure even partial control over Greenland's resources and infrastructure, it would gain enormous leverage over the global economy and reduce its vulnerability to American naval blockades and traditional shipping choke points, like the Strait of Malacca. So where does this leave Greenland itself? This is where the story gets really interesting and complicated. Greenland is not an independent country. It's an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. Greenland has its own parliament and controls most domestic affairs, but Denmark handles foreign policy and defense. However, Greenland has been moving steadily toward full independence for years. The ice sheet is melting, resources are becoming accessible, and many Greenlanders believe independence is finally economically viable. But independence comes with enormous challenges. Greenland's economy currently depends heavily on subsidies from Denmark, about $500 million annually, which represents roughly half of the government's budget. The population is tiny, just 56,000 people, most of whom live in small coastal towns with limited infrastructure. There are more reindeer in Greenland than people. Building a functioning independent state would require massive investment in infrastructure, education, healthcare, and government institutions. This is where the superpowers see their opportunity. America could offer security guarantees, military protection, and investment in exchange for continued access to Thule Air Base and influence over resource development. Russia could offer energy partnerships and Arctic development expertise. China could offer the massive infrastructure investments that Greenland desperately needs. Each option comes with strings attached. Each option means trading one form of dependency for another. The Greenlandic government is walking an incredibly delicate tightrope, trying to leverage superpower interest to gain maximum benefit, while avoiding becoming a proxy battlefield for great power competition. The Premier of Greenland has repeatedly stated that Greenland is not for sale, but also acknowledged that the island's future requires international partnerships and investment. Let's talk about climate change, because it's absolutely central to this entire story. The Greenland ice sheet is melting at an accelerating rate. Scientists estimate that Greenland is losing approximately 280 billion tons of ice per year. That's not a typo. 280 billion tons annually. This has two enormous implications. First, it's making previously inaccessible resources reachable. Mining operations that would have been impossible 30 years ago are now feasible. Second, it's opening up the Arctic Ocean to year-round navigation. By mid-century, scientists predict the Arctic Ocean could be largely ice-free during summer months. This transforms the entire geopolitical equation. Shipping routes that were unusual for most of human history suddenly become viable alternatives to the Suez and Panama canals. Military operations that were extremely difficult become routine. Resource extraction that was economically unviable becomes profitable. But there's a darker side to this transformation. The melting ice sheet is contributing to global sea level rise. If the entire Greenland ice sheet melted, it would raise global sea levels by about 7 meters, enough to flood major coastal cities around the world. We're not talking about that happening tomorrow, but even partial melting creates enormous risks. The very process that's making Greenland valuable, the melting ice, is also creating global environmental catastrophe. It's a tragic irony that the superpowers racing to exploit Greenland's resources are simultaneously contributing to the climate change that's making those resources accessible. So why does this matter to you, regardless of where you live? Because control of Greenland will help determine the balance of power for the rest of this century. If America secures dominant influence, it maintains its military superiority and breaks China's rare earth monopoly, potentially preserving the existing global order. If Russia gains significant control, it achieves a long-sought strategic advantage over NATO and secures its position as an Arctic superpower, fundamentally challenging Western security. If China succeeds in its economic penetration strategy, it secures the resources necessary for continued technological dominance and establishes a precedent for using economic power to gain strategic territory, potentially reshaping how global influence is exercised. The race for Greenland is really a race to define what kind of world we'll live in. Will it be a world where traditional military alliances and democratic partnerships prevail? A world where authoritarian powers use economic leverage to expand influence? Or something entirely new? The decisions made about Greenland in the next decade will ripple across global trade, military strategy, technology development, and climate policy. This frozen island, home to fewer people than a mid-sized town, has become ground zero for the great power competition of the 21st century. The ice is melting, the resources are emerging, and the superpowers are positioning themselves. What happens next in Greenland won't stay in Greenland. It will reshape our entire world.